People ask me all the time, how do you afford to travel? My standard response is, how do you afford to do anything? You just set your priorities. I mean, going out for dinner at night is no different than going on vacation for a week. You just allocate time for it. Once you figure out the important things in life, you find ways to do them. Last year, we spent a week scouting cliff jumping spots in Northern California. This year, our plan was to go back with a van full of our craziest jumpers and explore what NorCal has to offer. Our first stop was Rainbow Pools in the Stanislaus National Forest. It's a popular day-use spot along the south fork of the Tuolumne River. The main jumping rock is only about 20 feet tall, which is the perfect height to warm up for this trip. There are more pools downstream, which we tried to get to, but the area is currently off limits. So we spent the remainder of the day practicing our dives. About a mile away from Rainbow Pools is Lost Claim Campground. We went to bed at 3 a.m., which, for camping, is pretty early, but we had two spots to go to the following day, Candy Rock and Blue Streak.
Just
Candy Rock is at the end of a long dirt road just north of the town of Murphy's. It's a pretty well-known spot. That means we shared it with a few carloads of locals. But what the locals don't know is a mile downstream is a giant swimming hole called Blue Streak. Blue Streak gets its name from the giant streak of blue granite that marks the spot. The place is untouched except for this graffiti by some idiot named Lord Ranch. Graffiti is perfectly acceptable in the built environment, but nature is not the place for your spray paint. The next day we drove to Traverse Falls, just north of Placerville. We parked the van on the side of the road and hiked in. The creek was very small, so when we got to the falls, we didn't expect to see such a huge swimming hole. Our plan was to swim here for a few hours, then catch the sunset along the American River. We drove through the town of Folsom, all the way to a park just below the prison. We walked down a small trail to a giant cliff along the river called Big Tick. The river was pretty warm, so we hung around until it got dark. After we ate pizza, we spent the whole night next to the campfire talking about monsters and aliens and how we were going to travel to the future. On the 4th day, we drove to a waterfall in Penn Valley, right below Lake Wildwood. When we got to the turnout and parked the van, we saw a ton of trash at the trailhead. Apparently, this is where all the local slobs dump the shit they no longer want. Sadly, someone left a kitten here to die. We took her down to the falls with us and fed her hot dogs while we jumped. A couple of people in our group left early to go back to LA. We took her back home with them, and she got adopted 2 days later. The rest of us went to Beale Falls, named after Beale Air Force Base nearby. We hiked in late afternoon and got to the falls with just enough light left to jump. The cliffs around the pool were gigantic. We measured the biggest jump at 81 feet. We drove to our camp spot at Feather Falls and made Claudia chop wood for the fire. We were the only people in the campground, so we partied as loud as possible. I think even the bears were scared to come out that night. The next day we drove to Seven Falls along the Feather River. On the way there, we got stuck behind a herd of cows, which made the drive twice as long. Seven Falls cascades down an almost unreachable section of the Feather River. The hike in drops down 2,000 feet from the road on a nearly non-existent trail. We didn't know what to expect when we got there, so when we came around the corner to the first waterfall, our jaws dropped. As cliff jumpers, we expect to see a million people at the swimming hole. When someone finds a big jump, they tell their friends, and then their friends tell their friends. All the good places become popular for that reason. And with the advent of social media, it's basically impossible to keep anything a secret these days. For some reason, no one knows about Seven Falls. Of course, after this airs though, everyone's gonna go try and find it. If you do, please try your hardest to keep this place clean. If you see trash that isn't yours, don't bitch about whose it is, just pick it up and hike it out. You as an individual are responsible for keeping these places pristine. Don't be an armchair activist and blame everyone else. You become the solution. Clean up trash every time you're outdoors. If you see graffiti at your local swimming hole, paint over it. If you watch people leave their trash behind, get up in their faces and tell them to pick it up. The outdoors is ours collectively. Be the responsible person you know you should be, and do your part to make the world a better place. No fucking excuses. On the 6th day of the trip, we dropped half our van off at the Greyhound station in Chico, then drove to the town of Paradise and hiked down to a spot along the Feather River. On the way in, we encountered a buddy who had been following our trip on the internet. He was alone and kinda lost looking for the swimming hole, so he followed us down the trail to a spot called Cable Pool. There are a couple swimming holes along the flumes in town, but we only had time to stop at one. The water was in the upper 70s, and the cliffs went all the way up to 50 feet. This was all we needed to relax and chill for the day. We camped under the stars and woke up early the next day to meet up with a couple carloads of friends. On our scouting trip last year, our buddy's dad told us about an amazing swimming hole along the Yoder River past the town of Washington. He mentioned that we might need some lifted trucks to get out there, but we didn't listen to his warning. So we tried to drive in our Volvo, but didn't make it more than 2 minutes down the road. This year we were smart and got a couple friends with 4x4s to carry us out there. We crammed 16 people in 2 trucks and blasted down the road. Everything we heard about Jolly Boy's mine was true. If there's a cliff jumper's paradise, this is the place. The town of Washington was a very profitable gold mining town in the mid-1800s. The swimming hole here was actually created by a mining company who struck a giant gold vein underneath the river. They have been drilling this hole for the past century, and the mining operation continues to this day. hooked up a rope swing to the end of the crane. With a 30-foot launch, only some of us attempted it. We measured the crane at 79 feet. This is definitely one of the biggest jumps on the trip. The sketchy part about jumping from the crane is it sways in the wind, and your momentum pushes the crane backward, which makes it hard to do anything crazy. Easily the highlight of the trip. We could have spent 3 days here jumping and swimming, but we had a schedule to stick to. Herman Hesse wrote, "For me, the trees have always been the most penetrating preachers. They are like lonely persons. In their highest boughs the world rustles. Their roots rest in infinity. But they do not lose themselves there. They struggle with all the force of their lives for one thing only, to fulfill themselves according to their own laws, to build up their own form, to represent themselves." Last year we camped at the most beautiful spot in the Tahoe National Forest called Grouse Ridge. We looked down from our campground to a series of alpine lakes. It was way too late in the day to hike down there, and we had to be somewhere the next day, but we promised the following year we would go back and hike down and check them out. The hike down was an easy couple miles long, and painted with beautiful vistas and vividly bright foliage. From above you can see Milk Lake, Round Lake, Long Lake, and Island Lake. We had our eyes set on the island. We wanted it all to ourselves so we could sunbathe and party naked. When we got to the lake, we stripped down to our shorts and jumped in. watched the clouds float by in the warm lake water, then swam to the island to lay out, drink beers, and blast some Sabbath. We spent this much-needed mellow day relaxing for hours at the lake before we hiked up to catch the sunset at the lookout tower by our campsite. The last day of the trip, we went to Emerald Pools along the Yuba River. On the hike in, you can see memorials from all the people who died cliff jumping there. Cliff jumping can be dangerous, but this spot is especially deadly because of the whirlpool behind the waterfall. As I'm recording this, someone just sent me an article of another kid who died cliff jumping here last weekend. I urge everyone who visits this place to stay away from the falls. There are many jumping spots below that are much safer. This day, another group of cliff jumpers set up a few slack lines in a hammock above the pool. A few of us walked out and swung on the ribbons. No matter how well planned a road trip is, shit always happens. We were lucky no one got seriously injured on this trip. To all the families whose kids died doing what they love, our condolences. For the people who say they don't have time to travel, it's all just an excuse. For the people who are too lazy to travel, well, I feel sorry for you. Sometimes our dreams are one step away from reality. All it takes is that anxious urge to gas up the van and drive.